Hello there, my name is Linnell Grunman. I am a member of the Sandwich Substance Abuse Prevention Task Force. I'm also one of your selectmen in town. And we're here to talk with Deputy Chief of Police John Carmichael on a new program sponsored by the task force that we are calling Critical Thinking, Substance Abuse and Youth. Our topic today is going to be marijuana use in general, the effect of the decriminalization that Massachusetts voted on 4 years ago of 1 ounce of marijuana, and we are going to touch on the ballot question, question 3, that will be on the November national election and on our ballots, asking that legalization be made for medical marijuana. So welcome, John. Can I call you John?
Yes.
Or do I have to call you Deputy Chief?
No, John's fine.
John and I've gotten to know each other over the issue of medical marijuana and the ballot question.
Yes.
John, you're very active with the Mass Prevention Alliance. Can you tell me just a little bit about that and your participation?
Well, the Mass Prevention Alliance is basically, it's a grassroots organization. There's a lot of people that are in the profession that have gotten involved with it, but the great thing is that it's a lot of, your average people that are just volunteering their time. They see that this question that's coming up is not good for the state of Massachusetts, so people have really jumped on board to help out and help educate people before they vote on the question.
I'm impressed with the Mass Prevention Alliance, MAPA. I first became aware of them, I would say roughly May, because they did a wonderful forum with a debate as the format to talk about the medical marijuana ballot question at the Cape Cod Community College, and I was shocked to find out that they're not even a year old.
Right.
But they finally, the thinking was, just as you said, that there's so many different coalitions working for youth issues and how substances impact the risk to our youth. Right. And they coming together for this alliance has really been powerful. I understand also that they kind of spurred on the committee that's working actually vote no on ballot question 3. So I wanted to also talk about your background. I know you had a very unique experience when you were getting your master's degree. You want to talk about that?
Yes, sure. Well, first, my interest with drug use and abuse really started with being a DARE officer. I was a drug abuse resistance education officer for about 9 years. And that's what kind of, I liked that part, that prevention part of getting in the schools and talking to students and kids about the dangers of drugs and everything. And that's what ultimately kind of stayed with me through my career. When I went back to school to get my master's degree, you think a lot about what you want to do it on, but it didn't take me long to think that it had to be something to do with drugs. I actually got my master's right around the same time as decriminalization started in Massachusetts, so that's what I ended up focusing on.
And let's talk a little bit about that. That's a very interesting history. I've learned a lot from you, actually. For example, we're the first state, and this was 4 years ago. So 4 years ago, we went to the ballots in November, and the majority voted in decriminalization of 1 ounce of marijuana. The first thing I want to say about that is that sounds like a small amount. That's 20 joints.
Correct.
So we were the first state in 30 years to do any kind of decriminalization. And what did your research reveal to you about how that impacted the decision to go forward with that?
Well, again, similar to medical marijuana, that was a referendum ballot question that was done by petition. People signed on to the petition and put it on the ballot, and it ultimately passed. There was an incredible amount of money that came from out of state people that had an interest in basically legalizing marijuana. One of the biggest supporters was George Soros, who supported that initiative with, I think, $400,000. So there was a lot of money, out-of-state money, that was poured into that.
And I would assume that's because there's a business there that can be tapped into once we go to that decriminalization.
Yes.
Right.
And the thing that I saw that was happening during that time after that initiative came about was that we were the first state in 30 years to decriminalize marijuana. And what we were doing is we were going back and looking at the studies that were done 30 years ago as how they related to decriminalization then. And basically what I did in my thesis was do a critical analysis of that. And what I found was that a lot of those studies that we're looking at in Massachusetts were completely flawed. And there was bad information that was being put out there, and that ultimately probably helped people make their decision in that vote. But it wasn't good information.
And at the same time, is the marijuana that's available to our young people now the same marijuana that was available 30 years ago?
Absolutely not.
Yeah, tell us about that.
You know, and that's the confusing thing for a lot of parents, because they, you know, maybe they have used marijuana in the past when they were younger growing up, or they know people that have, and the problem is that the THC levels back then were very low. They ranged anywhere from 2, 3, 4%.
And THC is essentially considered the hallucinogenic component of marijuana?
Correct. It's a psychoactive substance. It's in a delta-9 tetrahydrocannabinol, or THC for short. And that's the main active ingredient in marijuana. And those levels back then were quite low. They were 2 to 4, 6%. But over the years, especially with like hydroponics and that type of thing, they have been able to enhance that THC level actually in the plant by manipulating it through cultivation techniques and their plant selection and that type of thing. And now what we find is that those THC levels can go way up, over 15%, as high as 25 and 30%.
Yeah.
And that's a fact. Like that, you know, it's not the same marijuana that was around on the streets 30 years ago.
Right.
It's a much more potent substance now.
It's much more potent, and I think when you consider the effects of THC on any brain, it's dangerous, but you consider the effects of that on a developing brain, it has particular risk.
Correct.
Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, I have to say that I just went through to a wonderful lecture a few nights ago that the task force sponsored. Dr. Ken Duckworth, who teaches at Harvard, he's a psychiatrist, he teaches at BU. He's works with the National Association of Mental Illness, quite an expert on the chemistry of the developing brain and the effects of drugs on it, in particular the increasing that the medical community is seeing on psychoses and mental problems in our young people, because the young people are using marijuana at a younger and younger age. Are you seeing that now, since we've decriminalized 1 ounce? Are the statistics bearing that out in our state, that kids are using more and at a younger age?
Yes, absolutely they are. And part of what my thesis looked at was those studies that were done back then. A lot of them just measured use rates, and they said, you know, this was the use rate before decriminalization, this was the use rate after decriminalization. But they weren't longitudinal studies, they were basically looked at what it was before and what it was right after. And there wasn't, it didn't fluctuate a lot. So over the years, use rates have basically just showed us trends in use, you know, and they go up and down, they fluctuate as the years go by for whatever factors are involved in it. But a lot of the things of what they didn't measure were the things that we know now that were empirical, evidence-based factors that, you know, contribute to kids' drug use problems later on. And one of those things is, you know, a couple of those things are perception of harm, how kids view the harmfulness of a substance, that makes them more likely to initiate to using drugs.
So let's talk about perception, because I'm seeing this in my community, and I'm certainly seeing this in my own experience. Since we have decriminalized 1 ounce, how does that impact the perception kids have about marijuana?
Well, the kids they're very influential. So when kids see that the adults are decriminalizing it, basically we're telling them that it's not bad for you, and they're, you know, they don't really formulate that as well as we do. So they see it as it's not bad for you. So the harmfulness of it isn't as bad. Their perception of harm therefore lowers, and when their perception of harm lowers, and this is empirical, that helps them further. They could initiate to drugs just because of that. Like they're not as worried about it as if, you know, they think that you know, of heroin or cocaine or that thing. But the problem is that the drugs are interrelated, and that age of onset, when they do initiate, and this is what we've seen, that the age of onset has dipped, it's gone down, and when that happens, you can basically predict future drug use problems. And in some individuals,
it leads to addiction. If they use at the early age on the developing brain, they have an increased number, there's a percentage increase to the level of addictions in
Right.
that same population.
And
I think that's so significant.
Right.
So in other words, you know, Dr. Duckworth, who I've gotten to know, is so impassioned about getting the information out as it relates to the developing brain. If you start a drug, let's use marijuana as an example, when you're 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, before you're 25, it has a very different effect on your life
Right.
than if you wait till you're older, because, you know, roughly they say developing brain is 25.
Correct.
So I think that is something, I know for the task force, that's one of our major goals, is to educate people about that. Because I know certainly in my generation, no one talked about the developing brain.
Right.
You know, marijuana, drugs, alcohol, all of it was just about use. You know, it wasn't really about specific scientific facts about individual age groups.
Right.
That's changed a lot, hasn't it?
Yes, it has.
Yeah.
And you know, just go back to that real quick. What we've seen now is that that age of onset has dipped, and there are more percentages of kids that are using at that earlier onset. And you know, in my town, what we do is we go into the schools. We've been doing it a lot recently to try and educate kids on you know, your gateway drugs, your alcohol, tobacco, and marijuana, and you know, we're trying to teach them that, you know, your adolescent brain doesn't, you know, you're not matured until you're 25 years old, and that's why, you know, we make it so that you shouldn't be drinking until you're 21 years old, and our job is in our coalition is to delay that age of onset as long as possible, and if even better than that would be to prevent it. So we know that initiation to drug use happens between 10 years old and 21 years old. That's the critical time, and that's the critical stage where the kids' brains are developing. So, you know, they kind of run together.
And there's a risk there that people are just beginning to understand.
Yes.
I think that one thing that's really complicated when it comes to talking about drugs. I know a lot of parents say to me, I'd rather have my kids smoking weed than drinking alcohol. And alcohol is a terrible thing. But I think that what is not understood is the actual risk because of the early use of marijuana and other drugs. And bearing in mind what we're seeing in our state in particular, since we have decriminalized 1 ounce, there's a couple of things I really want to hit on. You were kind enough to come to another meeting and talk to a group of selectmen and councilmen on this subject, and you brought up something that I was not aware of. When we decriminalized 1 ounce, what happened to our court system and to the way that the courts deal with youth and first offenders?
Well, to support that, the number one, the vast majority of the way that people receive drug treatment in the United States is through the criminal justice system. And there is punity sometimes with people when they break the law, but not usually in the early stages of it. When there's drug offenses that are committed early, the criminal justice system is designed to get that person treatment. It's not punitive. It's to get them into a treatment program. It's to get them education, to understand drugs, to help them wean off that drug, and then, you know, carry on with a productive life.
Some intervention.
Correct.
So,
it's early intervention.
Early
yes.
intervention. Exactly. And that was existing in our court systems prior to 4 years ago.
Yes. And what was portrayed to the voters was that, you know, you better decriminalize marijuana, because if your kid is caught with marijuana, they're not going to be able to get into college, and they'll lose public housing, and they'll lose grants, and they'll lose all these different things. It's never happened. It never. There was nothing to support that. And you know, the problem with that is it was portrayed that way. It was conveyed to the voters that, you know, this is going to happen. It was almost like the boogeyman effect coming out.
And it would it would be a benefit, so you wouldn't have that on your record.
Correct. Right. And nobody ever had it put on their record in the beginning. If you were caught
so
maybe 2, 3, 4 times,
and
other things happen, then you know, there's more punity to it. But in the beginning stages, it was all about intervention. Now, decriminalization, that law told us that what we were going to do was any person who's under 18 years of age would be and they had under an ounce of marijuana, would be given a civil citation, a civil fine, and then that would be assessed to them, and then they would also have to go to a drug education type of program that's facilitated through the court system. That was never set up. It was never funded.
Yeah.
And it was never set up to happen that way. So now all of those kids who prior to decriminalization were caught with marijuana and brought in front of the criminal justice system and received treatment, got it. The kids that have it now after decriminalization have lost that mechanism.
So there's
it doesn't
no
exist.
intervention. There's no early intervention.
There's no intervention through the criminal justice for that particular problem.
When you told me that, it made so much sense based on what I've been observing for 4 years, the impact of marijuana use in my community and my own personal experience. That makes absolute perfect sense. Because I know that we are having challenges within our communities from a public health standpoint. We're having challenges trying to assess kids that may need treatment. There is. It's hard to find an intervention mechanism beyond, you know, the kid, the young person, or their family.
Right.
And I think that there's still, you know, when you put that against this perception that marijuana is not that bad. In fact, I was in a meeting recently where a mother was talking about how she was letting her teenager smoke marijuana to deal with anxiety.
Right.
And she didn't have the information about what that could potentially be doing to his developing brain. Right. There was one, I'm only going to touch on this briefly, but it's a fascinating fact, and it came up in our discussion with Dr. Duckworth, that we have 20,000 genes in our, 20,000 genodes in our bodies. We only really understand 10. But there is a genode that we cannot test for, but there is a genode that makes some young people susceptible when they use marijuana in that developing brain portion to creating psychoses and mental illness.
Right.
So that's a fact that people don't think about.
As well as suicidal ideation as well. Yeah.
So and we can't tell who those kids are. So you know, from my perspective, what I feel we need to do is to protect, protect our youth. We need to probably move on. This clock isn't working, so I think my watch will have to do. Just to the medical marijuana issue. So we're going to link it to the risk factor for youth. Talk to us about what you see as a risk factor. I will just say that the ballot question, because it was a ballot question and had no oversight through the legislative process, in my opinion, is very bad public policy, because no agencies similar to 2008 that will be implementing it had any input into that implementation.
Right.
We'll be in a very similar situation where we have this broadly written legislation that has to go into effect January 1st, and there's no real plan. But talk to me about what you see as risky in making these clinics available in our communities.
Well, I think the biggest problem is, again, going to be the perception of harm. Now, the kids' perception of harm when decriminalization passed went down, and those percentages got larger. So now what we're going to do is we're going to put dispensaries in the center of towns and allow, when a person has a hardship, we're going to allow indoor grows in the residential areas. So it's going to, kids are going to be walking by these things, they're going to see this stuff. They're going to see the people hanging around these facilities. They're going to see people using these drugs in the public, because this law, if it passes, does not prohibit public use. It doesn't prohibit use at work. It doesn't prohibit use at school. There's nothing in there that even, it says that it doesn't require it, but it also says that it doesn't say that it prohibits it.
That's very interesting. You're absolutely right. If you read the ballot question, it looks like it does. But the language definitely gives gray area.
The language is it doesn't require it. So
exactly.
That's a problem. That's something to be concerned with.
And we've seen in the other states, 16 that have already legalized medical marijuana, we see that public use as a real problem.
Right. And the next thing is the ancillary crime that's involved with it. In every other state, there will be increase in robberies, breaking and enterings, burglary. There'll be drug resales that will happen. A lot of these, we're allowing dispensaries to grow unlimited supplies amount of marijuana, and we're allowing people with a hardship to grow it in their house. To think that there won't be diversion of those drugs,
naive.
Would be very naive.
Right.
It's happened in every other state. It's been an absolute problem, and these drugs are getting out on the streets. And the other thing is,
and I'm told that the street price of marijuana, once a state legalizes and starts to develop these series of clinics, that the street price goes way down, which creates more use. other drugs go down. So it
Correct.
also creates a very negative environment
Right.
for.
With the black market now, you have the street level dealers that deal marijuana right now that have, you know, it can range anywhere from $250, $350 for that ounce.
Yeah.
Now what they're going to have to do is there's competition now, because there will be diversion.
Right.
So whatever the price is established at the dispensary, or the diversion from people where their indoor grows, that's going to cause the street price to go down. They're
Right.
going to be competing with them. And that's going to allow our kids to get more marijuana at a cheaper price.
I think the perception issue is huge, absolutely huge with medical marijuana. And, you know, I have to echo again what Dr. Duckworth talked about, that you can't research marijuana right now because of its classification as in the federal system. So the research that could be done to really be specific about the medical implications of it has not been done.
Right.
So we think that it is, you know, magically somehow related to a relief. But we know also that with all these other states, that those important diseases like glaucoma, relief from pain and cancer, that a very small percentage of people who are getting the cards to allow them to buy marijuana are in that category. So what does that tell us? That we've got less than 5% of the people now that are eligible to use medical marijuana that has been described as essential for these specific illnesses and conditions not using it. So what does that tell us?
That tell us that I think the ultimate goal is to just legalize marijuana.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're in essence, that's what we're going to be doing if this law passes, because we already know from Colorado and California and Washington and Michigan that you know, these dispensaries being allowed to you know, grow these substances and put them out on the street, and having a marijuana card, that, you know, the people that are obtaining this marijuana aren't the people that have cancer and glaucoma and ALS and all these other diseases. They are, again, the vast majority people that have migraines and insomnia and even anxiety. To treat anxiety with a drug that causes suicidal ideation doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Right. So the real issue is, I think, that people don't understand marijuana, both sides of it, the good side and the bad side, and that this creation of deregulation is very risky for our communities. But we can talk forever because we're out of time already. You're going to have to come back.
Okay.
That'll be
whatever we have to do.
I know. Educating people about, I think, what I can only phrase as the dangers of marijuana is really important. So thank you, John Carmichael, Deputy Police Chief from Walpole, and I want to thank you for tuning into Critical Thinking, Substance Abuse, and Youth, and we will be coming to you again with more important information.